And welcome everyone to tonight's presentation of OTF Connects, Supporting Student Learning with iPads with Jacqueline Calder. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Syria Skirhan, who's the administrative facilitator for the OTF Connects program, did try to join in and say hello, but she's having some computer difficulties. So she's certainly very grateful that, that you participate in these sessions and take some of your own time to do some self-directed learning. And we are especially grateful that we've got Jacqueline tonight talking about iPads. This is a very hot topic in the classroom. And we love that you're here to share your learning and ask questions and further the opportunities for your students in the classroom. So Jacqueline, I will just quickly advance to one other slide here because we do like to capture our map of Ontario in our recording. And then I will just hand things over to you. And the very next slide, Jacqueline, is the question slide. So you can go ahead and advance to that and introduce yourself, and we're all good to go. If you encounter any other tech difficulties, just let me know in the chat, and I'll try and follow up with you.
Perfect. Thank you, Louise. Welcome, everyone. Louise, can you? Thank you. Well, I just want to try and get a quick idea before we get going too far here. If you could use over on the left-hand side where you did the check mark or the red X before, you'll see now that it says A, B, C, D, E. If you could choose one of those letters, then we'll just kind of get an overview on where everyone's at with iPads right now. Please and thank you. Thank you, Louise. So the polling tool is under your name in the participants box. So tonight, while you're doing that, I'll just explain kind of what we have planned, is kind of an overview on all sorts of different apps to use with the iPad, but with a focus less on the actual apps and more on the learning activities or kind of clustering apps around learning activities or ideas for using the iPads, and with some opportunities for some sharing built in. I'm feeling that for those of you on the spectrum just starting out, you'll be looking at a lot of the apps tonight, and then you'll probably have hopefully, choose one or two of the different apps and have some self-directed learning after you leave to really figure out those apps. And I will be either available after or stick around to help you find the resources that you do need, some extra resources that aren't on the wiki, but to help you find out. So tonight will be a big overview and sharing on ideas. For those of you on the starting out part of the spectrum, please don't let this overwhelm you. It is in no stretch of the imagination going to be, tomorrow you're doing it all. It'll be a choose one or two things that make sense in your classroom to start off with. And for those of you on closer to the E side, that you've chosen E or D, and you've been using them for quite a while, we'll be looking to you to share some examples, maybe some ideas as we go, and this will be just kind of a way for us to collaborate and share lots of ideas, and hopefully kind of just fill up our toolbox of ideas to be working on ways that these can support student learning in the classroom. Thank you, Louise. So the most of us are sitting right around the middle there. And then we have in all ends of the spectrum. Perfect. This is excellent. What I'm going to do now is I have created a wiki for resources for tonight. And this wiki will be available after the session. And if we just wait a second, with this many of us in the room, this might take a couple of seconds. Oh, that's not the... Hold on one second, that's not coming in.
Isn't this fun, Jacqueline? Even after our test last night.
Yeah.
We tested all this out last night, folks. It was working perfectly, so hopefully we'll... Oh my goodness.
Why is it doing this?
Okay, why don't you try going back to the whiteboard and then back to the web tour and see what happens.
Let me just try one thing first here, if you don't mind.
Sure.
If I try signing in right in the whiteboard, that sounds silly, but I don't even know what address I used. really wasn't it. Okay, back to the whiteboard I will try. Sorry, folks. I do have a workaround if this isn't going to work. There we go. If all else, try. You see it? Okay, so I'm going to ask for everyone to under, where is it? It's underneath the, thank you. In the participant, under your name in the participants box, you know the green check mark and the red X, just because I had those technical difficulties, could I ask you to put the green check mark if you see a wiki in the whiteboard area now called Supporting Student Learning with iPads? If you see that, could you do the check mark? And if you don't see it, please click red X. Excellent. Okay, so Karen, it looks like yours isn't working. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put the link in the, just like Louise already did for me, thank you, in the chat. And if you want to open that up in just a separate web browser, you'll see that there as well. I'm hoping that the only reason you don't have it now is maybe just a bandwidth issue, and it'll catch up in a second. But if it doesn't, if you could just open it up in a separate browser window, that would be great. And if you have any problems with that, just either throw your hand up or throw it in the chat that it's not working for you. Okay, so this wiki has all of the resources that I have planned, but it also has some tools built in for us to collect information from you guys and other links and ideas. And this will be permanently available. I'm not taking it down anytime soon, so you can always refer back to it. And one place I was planning on starting, and I'm going to clear all of the check marks now. Does everybody see a page that says Supporting Student Learning with iPads? Could you put a green check mark if you do? Good, okay. So it is actually going fairly quickly with this many people in the room. Excellent. Okay, so just with a quick overview, and this is maybe some of my personal bias coming in, maybe to give you a little bit of background information. I spent a couple of years as a technology consultant, and I'm now, thank goodness, finally back in the classroom. Not that I didn't love my job as a consultant, it's just that I needed to be back in the classroom after way too many years out. And I have seen a lot of iPads purchased and then either collect dust or basically be used as really expensive pen and paper and haven't helped to improve the teaching any, or the student, more importantly, the student learning any. And so just kind of an overview on the strengths and weaknesses, and then maybe grab some input from you guys. But in terms of strengths that I've seen with iPads is how easy it makes it to create video and create different types of media, how easy it is to record and edit audio. And in comparison to if I have laptops in my classroom or if I have iPads in my classroom, I find that the iPads are more, they lend themselves really nicely to group work without that screen in their face all the time, blocking them if they're on different sides. It could be partially the fact that I'm in a lab with permanent science lab in a secondary school with permanent lab benches, so they're always sitting across from each other, they're not beside each other. But they can annotate and draw right on the screen. They can annotate media and images. And the newer versions have a really good, or at least it works really well with my grade 10 boys or grade 12 boys in the morning, a great speech-to-text tool and a text-to-speech features, so that they can have, just with a simple setting on the iPad, they can have it read any text they touch and copy, and then they can have it read out to them, and they can select the speed for that. They can also, anywhere they would normally use the keyboard and type in, they can, if they have their headset on, they can talk and it will type out. It's not perfect, but it actually gives them good revision skills as well, going back and looking. It can be used, and this is good for a science lab when we do labs, aren't always in our classroom, we go out sometimes. They can go, the iPads can come with us. And the other thing is that a lot of the time students have their own iPod Touches or iPhones, and this is helping them realize the potential of a lot of those devices. And so they can either go home and put similar apps onto their iPod Touches and continue the learning at home, or vice versa. They can come in with great ideas on how a certain tool could help them that I hadn't thought about. And so they can take some ownership into that. In terms of the weaknesses that I've seen a lot that sharing a lot of accounts. So my students use Evernote a lot and Dropbox, and on the iPads, unhooking those accounts, resetting up those accounts for different students can be a nightmare. It takes a lot of workarounds in order to make all of that work nicely. I find it much easier when I was a consultant seeing it in an elementary class where the students are in one room all day. If there were a set of iPads or in that room all day, a couple of iPads, as opposed to in the secondary when you have new students every 75 minutes or when the iPads are physically moving around. Getting files on and off can be time consuming, and this is often because in some school networks, the ports, which is just a term for the different technology I don't actually, to be honest with you, understand, but ports on the network are blocked, which means that the email program on the iPad doesn't work. So they can't email anything to someone else. They could go to like a webmail or a Gmail on the web, but you can't do attachments that way very easily. Sometimes you can do pictures and images, but anyways, getting files on and off the iPads can sometimes be cumbersome. And then the other thing is that there's no flash. So some of the interactive sites like Gizmos or Ministry Labs, from my point of view, or any of their interactive materials on D2L that were made before this year were written in using Flash mostly. And so some of that doesn't work, so you still need to go to a computer for those. And then one last just thought, and this could quite easily be based on my age group and the students I work with, is that it could make things too easy. And that there's not that tinkering aspect, that trying to figure things out. It takes away a lot of the struggles. So it could potentially takes away some of that hardcore problem solving and critical thinking involved as students get right into things like coding and that type of thing. But in terms of its media, it's very strong. So I'm just looking at a couple different comments here. The Puffin browser definitely does allow Flash. It's a great little browser. I still find that a lot of the stuff I want to do doesn't work very well with it. Unfortunately, it just doesn't quite smooth, but it does allow for some of the lower bandwidth stuff for sure. Or maybe it's less media intense, I'm not sure. But some things work really well on the Puffin browser. I was very excited, and a couple of the other things unfortunately didn't work. Raz kids. That's a great point, Claudia, that I hadn't even thought of because I'm lucky enough to work in a board with Wi-Fi everywhere when it's working, mind you. But is that a lot of the different apps, even if they're not using the internet for the actual part of the app, is that they require the Wi-Fi just to even open up or get going to log in. The initial setup, yep. A cart of 20, yes, absolutely, Stacy. Setting them up and getting them going is very, very intense. Time consuming. So you're close, Claudia? Any other strengths or weaknesses from anyone else you'd like to throw in the chat, or throw your hand up if you want to speak to it? Excellent strength, student engagement, wonderful. Yes, Karen. If your class blogs, the iPad is an absolute hand-in-hand fit. The sharing, yeah, Louise, I agree. The sharing can be an absolute nightmare. Excellent, Lisa. Lisa, what board, does your board, so let me rephrase this. You can actually use the Reflector app on the network at your school? It works? Excellent. In my guest wireless, so the Reflector app is an app where on your computer you can, I can AirPlay basically from my iPad to my computer, and then it allows you to be able to use it, project it up onto a screen, or and access it that way, or record the screen. Yes, very much so. But in some boards, depending on how the network is set up, oh, I'm jealous. All of you being able to use the Reflector app and the Apple TV. Before you go and purchase anything to work with your iPads, make sure you check it and test it on your network somehow, because again, it's a port issue, and in my board we can't have different devices on the network talk to each other, so my computer can't talk to another device. So it doesn't work. Works wonderfully at home, but it doesn't work there. So again, it's just things to keep in mind before investing in. That's smart. My school's so old, my reception is blocked. Right, Kathy, that makes sense. Ah, nice. They hunt me down, Phil, if I start plugging into the network with my own devices. Okay, I am going to go back to the home. Okay, so just another quick note here is that the plan for today is to discuss uses of the iPad where it's in the student's hand. So like the student learning activities, I've got this all set up on this wiki here around student learning activities. But just as a quick note is that I ended up purchasing my own iPad as a teaching device. So the ones that my school purchased are in the hands of my students all the time, but I have my own that I use as a teaching device, and I'm at the point now where I actually couldn't, well, I mean, I could, I'm sure, but I wouldn't be a happy camper to not use it. I use mine as a document camera in my classroom. I use it to create student portfolios. We just snap a picture and throw it into an Evernote folder. I use it for descriptive feedback all the time. So I take pictures of the student work and then I annotate it and draw on their work. And I create tutorials to post on our blog or our online classroom. And then we document what happens in our class to post on our blog. And so it's become very much a teaching device for me. And what an excellent idea, Stacy. I use a retort stand in my class as a document camera so that it holds it flat. But Stacy's here written in the chat that if you want to try using your iPad as a document camera, so you've plugged it into the projector, then you could buy at the dollar store a plate stand, and then you could that would hold the iPad flat, and then you could put the papers underneath it and use the camera app in your iPad connected to your projector. Absolutely, Butch. This whole wiki is accessible to you at any time. Absolutely. So just to highlight that today what we'll kind of be talking about as we go will be student learning activities, but that I'm sold on it as an extra device. I still need my computer in my classroom for teaching, but I definitely am sold on it as a teaching assistant and that it's very, very important to me. It's just with school purchased iPads, I have them set up and with restrictions on them and all set up for student use, but then I have my own iPad that I personally purchase, and I use it for personal things as well, but I use it in the classroom as my device, and the students, unless we need an extra one, they don't touch it, and if they do, they have to come up and ask and prove to me that what they're doing with it, as opposed to just a free-for-all like the other iPads. Not a free-for-all, but you know what I mean. A little less flexibility. They know they can't just go up and grab mine. So 4 quick management things with iPads in the classroom, and the first one is managing apps. And right now, and I will be completely open and honest, right now I have 8 iPads in my classroom, 2 of which are my own, 6 of which are the school's, and I use them the be careful way. They are set up. We haven't gone to we haven't transferred over to the new quote-unquote real way yet, or the legal way, or the Apple way yet, and that's only come out in Canada recently to be able to do it properly. But the way I have mine set up right now is that they are all under the same Apple account, so I've only purchased each app once, and yet they're on all of the iPads. And it's easy, it's cost-effective, I can put all of the iTunes gift cards. I can just put a gift card on the account. There's no credit card attached to the account. and it can work that way. The only problem is that you have to make sure you disable everything to do with that Apple ID, or so you can't use like the iMessages or the FaceTime, or it shows up on every single iPad. Like text messages with iMessage would show up on all of the devices potentially. So there's you have to make sure your settings are quite restricted. But Apple now has this Apple Configurator app that works with an Apple computer, and you can plug in up to 30 or however many, I think even more than that, iPads at once, and you basically image them. And you have to purchase the app for every iPad. So you would purchase the Pages app. If you had 30 iPads but you only needed it on 15 of them, then you would buy it 15 times. You get a huge discount. I think it's usually about half off. And you have to get codes for all of the different apps and do it that way. It does make managing them much easier, but especially when you get into big numbers, but it ends up costing you more as you go. But if you're in a position where you're just getting into the iPads right now, then I would look into that as a management option for sure. And it is the way that, I mean, up until Apple started this configurator and had it all set up that Canadians got the educator discount as well. If you had asked them, you know, I've got them all hooked up to one account ID, is that okay? They would just kind of say it's not appropriate, but they didn't. They weren't going to push anything until they had it set up properly, and they now are set up properly to deal with education accounts. That's excellent, Stacy. I'd love to ask you some questions later about that. Perfect. And that's being used by places like in my school board, all of our administrators have iPhones now, and so they're configuring them. Excellent. Okay. So on this page here, the settings and restrictions, I'll give it a sec just to see if it starts showing up for everybody. But what I've done is I've just I have just put screenshots of the common settings that I use for. Oh, that's good news, Phil. I might ask you to speak to that in a second if you're comfortable with that. Let me know in the chat if you would be comfortable just speaking about it for a second. On the settings on the page here in the wiki, what I've done is I've put some pictures of the settings that I've chosen in the classroom, and a couple to highlight are, so you go into your general and then into the restrictions, and you set yourself a 4-digit code. And these are the restrictions that I suggest. This is what works for me. I turn FaceTime messages, everything off. I'm in secondary school. The kids all have that stuff in their hands anyways, so it's not like we're shutting off the rest of the world. They all have it in their own iPhones, but in our iPads, we turn them off because they are on a shared account. I'll get to those in a second, Maureen. I turn explicit language off. I turn in-app purchases off, and I put installing and deleting apps off so that the Apple Store doesn't, or the App Store doesn't even show up. And I turn the multiplayer apps and adding friends off because they can either log in using their own Apple ID, and then it gets logged in, or it can they can all end up using the school Apple ID account and causing problems. So these are the settings on here that I commonly use. If you're setting up yours, you might want to.
Jacqueline, can you just say that again for us? Which ones you're turning off on them?
Absolutely. So if you scroll down on the page that's in front of you, the Supporting Student Learning with iPads, scroll down to the first, second, third picture, and then there's a list here, and I'll go through it here again. So I turn off FaceTime and iMessages. I turn off iTunes. I turn off installing apps and deleting apps, and that means that the App Store doesn't even show up. And then I turn explicit language off. I turn off in-app purchases so that they can't go and spend money within an app. I make the password required immediately because a lot of the time in my classroom, different groups are doing different things, and one group might need an app that I don't need to put on all the other ones, and so I'll put in the restriction password, and I'll go in and I'll add the app and then hand it back to them, and I have it set up so that they couldn't go and make changes, because the other option other than the password being required immediately is within 15 minutes. So I set it that way. I turned Twitter and Facebook off. That doesn't mean those can't be accessed on the web. It just means they can't set up their account on the iPad, which leads to problems of because my iPads are in different students' hands all day. So I just turn those off. They can still access them web-based. And then I make sure that I put under accounts to not allow changes. This makes it so that they can't enter in their own Apple ID. What happened before is I had everything turned off, but students were adding in their own Apple ID to download apps and games and stuff, which is creative, but it leaves the problem when they leave it logged in and other students grab it and start using it, and if they're accessing their and I'm just and then I turn off the multiplayer apps. Phil, do you want to elaborate on that a bit? My students just, if they're going to share on the iPad, they go and copy and then paste the link in Twitter to share it. But do you want to grab the mic and just expand on that a bit? Because there definitely will be some pros and cons to turning off those apps for sure. Oh, maybe not. Sorry. Okay. But I absolutely agree, Phil, that there will be some cons to turning off the Twitter and the Facebook apps. If I was in an elementary classroom all day, I'd probably have a class account or something set up. My students use their own Twitter accounts all the time on the iPads because we do a lot on Twitter. And if they set it up on the actual iPad, it becomes a management nightmare when it ends up in the next students. I didn't hear Phil either. Karen, I don't think his mic might not be working. So no one else has actually spoken. Don't worry. So I'm going to go back up here now to Maureen's questions. How do you organize the folders on the iPads? If I'm looking at my iPad home screen right now, and I put my finger down on one of the apps and hold it there until all of the apps are wiggling so that I can move them around, if I put two apps over top of each other, it will naturally put them into a folder. Try that, Maureen, if you have an iPad with you accessible, and then let me know in the chat in a bit if it worked for you, or if you want me to repeat what I said there. And how do I find out about the education discount? On the, let me just go back here to the page was apps. Managing apps. Here we go. So on the wiki, on this page here that I have up here called Managing Apps, under the new finally here quote unquote real way, I have a link to the Apple Education Volume Purchasing Info. And if you go to that link, it'll give you contact information at Apple and they'll set you up. They have to set you up as a volume education purchaser and that kind of stuff. And then how do you print using the iPad if you have to print something? Unfortunately, to print with the iPad, especially within a school, is a problem. You generally need a wireless printer. Thank you, Louise, for sharing that link. And so, quite simply, at school, oh, you don't have a problem, Louise? That's excellent. Yeah, it depends on how how things are set up. At our school, our networks are all run through the board, so they're all locked down and encrypted. My understanding, and I could be very wrong, Louise, is that in your school board, they're set up more in your school or in your classroom, like they're local little networks, as opposed to you being connected to the same network as someone else, so that you could probably print to a printer in your area. So I think the printing thing, unfortunately, comes down to a networking on your board side and how it's set up. And then, so what I do, yeah, exactly, Louise, I send my stuff by email if we can, but more often than not, I use Dropbox.com, and I put it into a Dropbox folder that I can access on my computer, and then I print from a networked computer in the school. There's a tutorial on YouTube about how to connect your iPad to the computer and then print. Oh, perfect. If anyone finds it, that YouTube video, we can share it in the chat here. Yes, perfect. New school, no fiber optics yet. Yes, Maureen, that's the other thing is that you can set up, and that's an excellent point, things like D2L, Edmodo, ThinkSpark, Edmodo, or Moodle. What you use depends again on what your school board might support or help you out with. Personally now, I use D2L, and some people on our school board are using Moodle as well still, and especially in the elementary, a lot of teachers are using Edmodo, and that is one way to provide like an online Dropbox for students, and then the teacher can print from a computer as they access if they choose to. Which leads to the next page I was planning on looking at, and that was, that's fascinating, Butch. I'm going to read that in more detail in a second here. Let me just finish with my train of thought, sorry. The student supported, the file management was the next place I was going, and you guys have clearly gone there ahead of me. And so a couple different options are Dropbox, and Louise just put that link in the chat. And you can install that on a computer, or you can access it from any web-based. And then what I do is I create a class Dropbox account, and I just have it hooked up on every computer. And oh, sorry, not every computer, every iPad, and then students can just throw in whatever they need to in that Dropbox. And then I can access it on my computer or on one of the computers in our classroom. And it's free to a certain extent in terms of storage. The nice thing is with Dropbox is that apps like Explain Everything, they allow you to save directly to Dropbox. And the other thing is the iCloud. So Apple has their own online storage, and you can save files from Pages, Numbers, and Keynote, their productivity suite, and you can save them to the iCloud. And then the other one is a lot of apps have what you see sometimes, send projects to iTunes. So if I was in GarageBand and I was creating some music in an audio file, when I go to save it after, it gives me the option to save it to SoundCloud, which is an online music storage. Or the other thing is it gives me the option to send project to iTunes. And if I send it to iTunes and then plug my iPad into my computer and open up iTunes on my computer, what I see is if you scroll down on this page here in front of you, you'll see a picture of iTunes, and you'll see iPad written up in the top. And then I can click on iPad, and then I can click on the apps. And below the list of apps is this file sharing. And all the different apps, so you'll see that I've clicked on Explain Everything in that picture there, and those are all the different files in my Explain Everything that have been sent to iTunes. And I can download those by clicking on them to my computer. Or I can add things to them if I need to as well. So that is another way of managing files, but it's time consuming. At least it takes longer than I have time to do. So I do that only at certain times. I tell my students, give me today that I'm circulating a piece of paper, and every student writes down file name, and then I'll just do plug them all in at once, and just dump everything I need to off of them. Yeah, if you scroll down on the page there, you'll see the screenshots of the pictures of how I access that. So that's the different options for file sharing, although I'd like to now, this is why I waited for a second, to go back up and read Butch's comment. I have an external hard drive from Seagate that becomes an app and can bring all materials from the iPad to a Windows computer. So that's excellent. Interesting. Now I wonder if that's every Seagate external hard drive, or is it a certain type? Okay, and then the next thing here that I was going to talk about for management is supporting student learning with iPads. Sorry, I'm just reading, not even thinking, is charging. I apologize. I was waiting to see if any more comments had come. Oh, here we go. I apologize. My multitasking, I'm trying to do the chat and what's on the screen here. Okay, charging the iPads. So there's a bunch of different commercial ways available, and I put links up here for all of them, but they're gosh darn expensive. So different options are, I'm lucky enough to work in a science classroom with locking doors, cupboards everywhere. So I've just designated, cupboards for iPads, and we've wired them up and put them in it. But the other thing I did when I was going to have to be moving around, is I just took I think it was a $15 toolbox from Walmart or somewhere like that, and I drilled a big hole in the side for the power bar to come in, and then I drilled holes all through it for air circulation. And if you scroll down on the page here, you'll see a picture of it. And then I just put a power bar in it and charging device, and that allowed me to lock it and then actually carry it with us to different places when we needed to take them with us. Heavy, but we could throw it in headphones, and this little cue card box down here is cards each student write any passwords or hints that they need to remember passwords for all the different 1,000,001 things that they're asked to use in class. So those are just some kind of options for charging the devices in a classroom. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is I have these all listed around different possible activities in the classroom, and then listing apps that are possible. Because we range from K to 12 in this room right now, we'll choose, and we have different access to money for apps, and some of us might be thinking more of students using their own devices, some of us might be thinking of school-owned devices, and that depends on what apps we choose. So what I've done is I've organized things, and if you scroll down the page in front of you, you can see all the different things that I've got explaining thinking using multimedia, blogging, or collaborative writing, and then we've listed a bunch of different apps below them so that you can choose the apps that work well for you. So the first page here explaining the thinking using multimedia. So on this page here are a list of examples. And the first example is quite long, but it's one a student made using an iPad camera. And it's just herself using a whiteboard and going through a tutorial, but explaining her thinking very well. At the top here is a link to a Bohr-Rutherford diagram that was created using the Explain Everything app. And then down at the bottom, there's a Voicethread that's not showing up. Two Voicethreads that aren't showing up that were created. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to publish the link.
Jacqueline, I see them. Maybe others are seeing them okay.
Oh, excellent. That's great news.
If you scroll down and see that there's two other videos there below the one of the person at the whiteboard, give us a green check mark.
So we might be half and half.
I'll grab the links, Jacqueline. You go ahead.
I put the link right in the chat already for this page. So what I'd like to do here is take maybe 2 minutes and let people either write on the whiteboard here in front of them. If you can see both of the voice threads at the bottom and the video and the link to the Bohr-Rutherford diagram, then by all means just explore here. If you don't, please use the link, and I'll just publish it one more time in there in the chat and just open it up in a separate browser. And just take a look at any one of these that might relate to you. The first 1, 2, and 3 of them, unfortunately for this one, is secondary, and the last one is elementary. The other examples I have are much more elementary focused, or much more balanced, but I just happen to have more examples for secondary here. But the very last voice thread on the bottom is an elementary classroom explaining their thinking. So if you want to take a look, so all of these were done on the iPads, and just take a look, and then we'll come back and have a quick discussion about this type of activity. So I will say maybe 2 or 3 minutes just to take a look.
Jacqueline?
Yes.
I'm not able to enter anything in my text box.
In the chat? Oh no, okay.
In the chat, yeah.
Louise, you suggested a solution to this. Would you be able to explain that again? I didn't catch exactly what you were saying.
Okay, I wasn't able to hear that because one of my videos was running. Could you repeat the question?
I sure can.
Smart.
Go for it.
It's Margaret. I'm not able to type anything in the chat area.
Sorry, could you repeat it one more time? The video started playing again. I'm having a rough night.
I can't enter a chat message. I was doing that earlier, but now nothing happened.
Okay, Margaret, thank you. You know what? I've had to redo my chat about 3 or 4 times already. So if you grab on the title bar, you can unpin it and pull it off to the left or the right, and then you can kind of drag it back towards the where it was, and it should fix itself.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Louise. I knew you had talked about moving it, but I wasn't sure if it was in a specific way. That's great to know. So if everyone could put a green check mark if you're back in the Blackboard room now and have finished investigating. I'm sorry if I was causing stress asking people to talk and chat when they couldn't. Please let us know again if you get, that's counterintuitive. It's not going to work if you can't type that you can't chat. But put your hand up if you are struggling, and one of us will get to you. Maureen, which app did they use for the video? Just Voicethread on the iPad. So which video did you choose to watch, Maureen? The drugs one? Yep, that was just Voicethread. So that on the iPad. So she created the Voicethread, and in her class they have a couple devices and they get passed around, and they added their own comments that way. Yes, Karen, did you have a question, or are you stuck without your chat working? Does your microphone work? Claudia, on the
sound is lagging a bit, so she might hear you in another few seconds. Oh, it's yellow. It should go away shortly.
Okay, I was wondering if anyone, now I'm recognizing that some people might be having some chat issues, but if anyone had any ideas on how they could use an iPad in their classroom based on your current setup, whatever you have access to now, is there a way that you could have students show their learning or their thinking on an iPad? Do you have any ideas on where you might use this in your classroom or how you might use this in your classroom? Does anyone want to share? Or grab the mic if someone has an idea. Keynote, so made presentations. Very cool. Edu creations, that's excellent. I'm just going to go on the whiteboard here back to digital storytelling. Well, that's not what Haiku deck. Oh, I'm going to want to hear more about this. Karen, could you explain a little bit more about Haiku deck? Excellent. Excellent, Barpur. Sketch is one of my favorite free apps, and the nice thing about Sketch is that it works on pretty much any device out there. They have a version of it, so all my students have it on their iPhones or their Android, whatever it is, their phones, whatever they have on them, they can do it. Yeah. Oh, QR code scanner, excellent. So on the whiteboard in front of you now, if you scroll down under possible activities and go to explaining their thinking using multimedia, I've listed 4 different apps. I've listed Explain Everything, which is a $2.99 app, and I use it religiously. I'm not 100% sure I need it on the students' ones. I could probably get away with EduCreations or Show Me. EduCreations is an amazing free app, but the nice thing about Explain Everything, and I would never take it off of my own personal device, is that I can create videos and I can upload them right into Vimeo from Explain Everything. Or I have a processor on my or a processing program on my computer that I can process those videos. So I'm addicted to Explain Everything, but there's information there on how to use Explain Everything. There's information there on how to use EduCreations, which is a great free app where students can draw on the screen for math as an example and explain how they did a problem, or you can bring in a picture and draw on the picture and record your voice. I use not only for students to explain their thinking, I also use it to explain my thinking when I'm marking their work. So I've gotten into a habit, if I'm actually doing like a summative assessment, I take a picture of their work or bring in the document and I record myself talking through as I mark it. And then I just throw it in a folder that I share with the students so that they can hear my thinking back, and I'm also modeling to them how I'm wanting to hear their thinking as they're doing things like that. And then the Voicethread app. And the nice thing about Voicethread is if you have like a couple iPads in your classroom but you also have a couple computers, you can use the Voicethread on both. And so it just makes it that much more accessible. I'm finding that I never have the ability, I'm finding I never have enough devices anymore. My need is getting so much more. So having the ability to have it on a computer or on a Voicethread is great. And Stacy, supporting student learning with iPads. I forget your first name. It's not Deb. If you could just type your name at Jan. Thank you. I knew it was 3 letters. I apologize. You recently found out that you can no longer delete the free Voicethreads and recreate. That is unfortunate. One thing to look there is that they used to give us a free Voicethread educator account really easily that gave you 50 Voicethreads. Now I think you have to email and ask for it, but that was a few months ago that I checked it out. So you might want to take a look and see if you can send them a message or a request to upgrade you to an educator account. That being said, I personally made a decision to purchase the Pro Voicethread for my classroom, and because my students can have their own, right. Yeah, well, you can do up to 5 Voicethreads, Maureen, so you can still use it. You know, I just need to be creative or limit how much you're using it unless you choose to go to the upgrade. Okay, so the next type of activity that we use a lot in my classroom, and I have seen used in some other classrooms a lot, is either blogging or collaborative writing. And on the screen here, I'm not sure if you can see I've embedded a primary pad, and this isn't even an app. This is just a web page that you set up your primary pad link and you can embed it here, but there's a link here where it says primarypad.com, and they give you the instructions on the front of the page. Oh, thank you, Louise. And this is a way to allow students to collaboratively write. In my classroom, a lot of the time what we do is we have an online chat when we're watching TED Talks or videos about, as we introduce a topic, so something to kind of get their interest or inquiry. And they'll type out more questions that they have about the topic. So they would type all their different questions here. And then at the end, we go through as a class and kind of consolidate that into our good formal questions that we'll use for research. It's very much, this right here is very much like a Google Doc. If you've used Google Docs before, there's a link up here that says Google Doc. And to create a Google account, you have to be 13. But unless your board has Google Apps for Education, and then you can use them with all of your students, of course. But some teachers are comfortable creating the Google Doc themselves and then sharing the link with the students, and then they can access it that way. But Primary Pad is just another alternative. And then down at the bottom is, unfortunately when I embedded this Google Doc, I didn't make it wide enough, but this is just an example of how my students used a Google Doc recently. And again, we were just brainstorming questions that we still had about a topic after watching a TED Talk about it, and then they each chose a question and off they went to do a research on it, and then they actually created a Voicethread on it after. So if anyone wants to play in the primary, oh Stacy, you're beating me to it, we're just about to use Wall Wisher in a couple seconds. If anyone wants to type in the Primary Pad, then by all means. No, it's quite all right. It's great. If anyone wants to try typing in the Primary Pad, we can see if it works here. Do you see if anyone could let me know in the chat, do you see what I've written in there? Hello, question, and then I spelled question wrong twice below that. Do you actually see that on your page on the Primary Pad? No, you don't. Oh, okay. I think we might be having some...
Jacqueline, it may be just at your end. I can see everybody typing and posting comments, but I don't see your comments. I see your original ones, but not your question.
Oh, perfect. So it's totally just me. Good. Well, I'm glad everyone else is getting to play, because that's really what actually matters. I played. Okay, perfect. So I am going to